The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Were there any more Tim Tams?
No, he only got himself a Tim Tam.
Literally just your Tim Tam. It's like there aren't Tim Tams, there's just like Toby's Tim Tam.
That's awkward, your donuts. I'm actually on a diet. I can't even have anything. I'm crash dieting for the awards.
Which awards? Media
The
TV ones?
awards. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's fancy.
Thank you very much to Flick for making this and all of our politics podcasts possible, as well as the entire empire of politics content on The Spin-Off. Kia ora tātou, this is Gone By Lunchtime. My name is Toby Manhire. To my left is Annabelle Lee, executive producer of the Hui final show this week. Is that right?
No.
Oh.
Final show on the 2nd of December, so ignore Toby and continue to tune in every Sunday at 9:30
I thought
a.m.
I saw you tweet something about final show.
No, we've filmed our finale, but it doesn't go to air until the 2nd of December.
Well, you've thrown New Zealand. I'm really glad. That's why I brought it up, to just clarify anyone who follows twitter.com and Annabelle Lee, who's misled the public, and it's an opportunity to make a personal statement.
Kia ora, Toby. Thank you.
Multinational television mogul, Annabelle Lee.
Yeah, congrats. And the nominations came out for the television awards the other day, and it was basically all of them had something to do with the empire of Annabelle Lee.
No, it's just the incredible people that I work with, and I was lucky enough to work on that.
You should hear what she says when the mics aren't on.
And you've sold.
It's
You've sold The Casketeers to Netflix to film in Australia.
Yeah.
You're an exporter.
Yeah.
You're the new Peter Jackson.
I know.
Gonna buy up all of Onehunga.
I'm gonna make Auckland Airport the most revolting place to land in the country. That's my goal.
And what have you done, Ben Thomas?
I've done nothing.
You're the acting chief executive officer of Exceltium Productions, selling things to not to Netflix but to unsuspecting members of the public.
That's they're just telling the truth well, as always. Mm.
Yes, and despite how busy he is, of all my media friends, including Toby Manhire, my beautiful friend Ben was the only one to come along and support the Bruce Jesson Memorial Lecture. Thank you, Ben. You can have my Tim Tam for that.
Thanks, Ben. You can have what's left of this Tim Tam, which I was...
which Toby's already licked.
I've just nibbled off the corner there. What... Anyway, today is a very special podcast. We're going to have 150 minutes of discussing the intricacies of the midterm elections. As all New Zealanders, we are, for a very fleeting moment, we're all experts in American politics.
Typical of the California right.
All I want to know is, did Taylor Swift's candidate...
No.
Wow.
No. Didn't work. Tay-Tay did not come through. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Taylor.
Shake it off.
Haters gonna hate.
I
Ben?
don't have a pop culture reference.
I
don't know what, Ted Cruz is like, thank you, next. I don't know.
We're not going to talk about the midterm elections. If anyone hasn't already pressed stop thinking that we are going to talk about the what I call the landscape of New Zealand politics, specifically the scorched earth left by Jami-Lee Ross. We'll start with that, and we'll talk about a bunch of other things we'll come to. But last time we spoke, Annabelle Lee was not able to be here. We had an emergency podcast, and I can't remember what day it was. It was quite early on, I think.
It was before it all turned sour. Was
it a Tuesday or a Wednesday?
Did it begin sour?
I mean, it begun insanely, I think. But I think everyone who was an observer of politics, apart from those in the National Party, were probably having a pretty good time. When the cross country midnight dash from Auckland happened, the 19-hour stand up inside Parliament.
Oh my God, was that not the best presser ever? Though I feel like I can never watch another live press conference again because
you've run out of time. You'll die before the end. Like if they're all that long.
It's like, you know how with Game of Thrones, it's like the penultimate episode is always better than the finale. That's what it was like, and forevermore, that's how it will be. Nothing will ever measure up to that press conference. It was so good.
But then it turned out that it wasn't just a political kind of car crash, multi-vehicle pile-up, and that actually there were real people involved, and that the reason that Jami-Lee Ross had fallen out with the National Party, despite front-footing this in his first presser and saying, they accused me of sexually harassing women, and then it turned out that actually there were no allegations of sexual harassment or criminal harassment, but what there were various allegations that he had either treated poorly or bullied or in some way sort of abused various women.
Isn't that harassment?
I think part of the problem in the sort of wash-up of all of this and in the way that the threads have been pursued is that there isn't good language around talking about the numerous ways that dudes can be shitty to women without it reaching a kind of criminal threshold or an employment law threshold, something that's in legislation or case law. There's all kinds of ways that a relationship can turn bad, and there can be a power imbalance, and there can be manipulative behaviour that we don't have easy ways of talking about on Morning Report or News Talk ZB or something. And I think that's kind of bedeviled this because, And soon after the newsroom article came out, alleging a lot of bad behaviour, bullying, sort of people who felt that they'd been poorly used by Jami-Lee Ross. I think 4 women in that story, and I think that should have put it all a bit more into perspective, and maybe there should have been less focus on, was Jami-Lee Ross treated well? Was everyone, kind of careful enough about Jami-Lee Ross's feelings?
I don't think the National Party helped much by saying things like behaviour unbecoming for a married member of Parliament. Actually, that's just shit behaviour for anyone, regardless of whether they're married or not.
Yeah, and I think that has been an issue, especially in the media discussion of it, where Simon Bridges has been pressed on, well, was there harassment? And Bridges says, well, the allegations that we had didn't reach the threshold of harassment. And then, Paula Bennett rightly sort of lampooned for saying conduct inappropriate for a married man because it sounds sort of antiquated and sort of a bit moralistic. But then,
it was just straight up dirty that, she went really low. And if we are to believe that he was, suffering a mental health crisis, to put that out there and isolate him further from his family, I think was pretty about as low as it gets, isn't it?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things because that was the this idea of inappropriate conduct for a married man came out publicly when Jami-Lee Ross himself had front-footed in his first stand-up that he had been accused of harassment by the National Party, which he said he was.
He said harassment, not sexual harassment, though.
No, I think he said.
No, he didn't.
Okay,
he said harassment.
Right. Willing to accept that.
But he did say that what he said was that he had been, in effect, threatened with revelations around which he
said were untrue.
Yeah,
which he said there was nothing to defend. So Paula Bennett introduced this idea using language that probably wasn't right. but sort of
Definitely
saying,
wasn't right.
But saying there was.
Well, it seemed like a
there.
threat in itself, didn't
Yeah,
it?
absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah, I think there's been way too much focus on Jami-Lee Ross and his well-being. So there's this idea that he was suffering a mental health crisis, but no one, including Jami-Lee Ross and his supporters, has suggested that his mental health issues came about as the result of anything except being confronted with his own actions and then the consequences of his own subsequent actions and decisions.
he was, however, sectioned. So at the time when all this was going on, clearly his mental health was very fragile, and that had been acknowledged even when he was.
Because it seems like the National Party references mental health when asked why they didn't take, action and stuff. But then when it comes to attacking him, the mental health stuff sort of gets ignored. I feel like both sides, not just the National Party but Jami-Lee, it appears that the mental health thing becomes an issue when it's advantageous, and then it's ignored when it's not. So, they'll say, look, we're dealing with a complex situation. He was clearly mentally unwell. We were having conversations with his doctors, but then, equally they'll behave in a way that seems to be not very helpful for someone who is suffering a mental health crisis.
I mean, on all sides there is a deeply uncomfortable sense that both in terms of the mental health issues and in terms of the harassment or Me Too related allegations, that the fear or that they are being used as sort of kind of political tools on all sides. And I think it's really hard to unpick all that because...
No, I think it's I think there's a lot of false equivalence being thrown around, particularly by Ross and his supporters here. The latest secret recording, which was dumped on Monday, which doesn't seem to disclose anything except the fact that Simon Bridges and Paula Bennett were keen to get Jami-Lee Ross out of Parliament as a result of the allegations of, I think they said 4 women. And people have been sort of seizing on kind of stray elements of that, saying, well, why was this a cover-up? Because they said, we won't make a big deal of it, we won't mention any of this publicly if you just go and be quiet. Well, that's perfectly reasonable because, as we've seen, since this has become public, it's usually a lot tougher on the women involved here than it is on the person that the allegations are being made about. We've had, utterly contextless texts from a finished relationship leaked to Radio New Zealand, and suddenly, the woman who sent that is on trial rather than anyone asking about Jami-Lee Ross's behaviour that led up to that text. Jami-Lee Ross has tried to name these women in numerous interviews that have been either bleeped or edited out. So I think it's perfectly reasonable that the National Party would have tried to get him out of Parliament, solve that problem, and not want this to blow up into something that, adversely affects the women. The second thing is that, there was this idea that maybe the National Party lied to him, that Simon Bridges said, well, we'll demote you, you leave Parliament, but if you act well, we can bring you back, you might get a promotion. I mean, that seems clearly just like a bit of a white lie that you tell somebody when their career is over to ease them out the door before you slam it behind them. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, when you have a troublesome MP backbencher who is, you're worried that they might go feral like Chris Carter did under Labour, if you could, you'd probably remove them in 15 body bags like the Saudi embassy. But, I don't think it's a problem to, in these sorts of negotiations, you do hold up the hope that there's a path back. And there should be a pathway back for people if they clean up their act, if they change their behaviour, if they apologise to their victims, and if they act well.
One of the other things that is spoken about in that leaked tape is the disloyalty. And I just thought it was interesting because when Bridges announced that Jami-Lee Ross was going on medical leave, he denied that he was the leaker, that there was any knowledge of him being the leaker, and said that it was a completely separate issue. But in that phone call, they talk about disloyalty to the party, which you which Ross doesn't seem to appear to deny there being. So
Bridges,
is that disloyalty in reference to leaking the information, or is that some other sort of act of disloyalty to the party that we don't know about yet?
Well, it's not clear from the context
Bridges claims it's separate. That's what he said in interviews on Monday when the tape came out. When he was kind of blindsided, I think, with the tape deliberately delivered on a Monday morning. But overall, there have now been four. There've been two tapes that came out early on that he posted on social media. There was the text that was leaked by Jami-Lee Ross's supporters to RNZ Checkpoint. And then there was the tape that came out on Monday morning. None of them have quite lived up to the claims that were made by Jami-Lee Ross in the first instance, have they?
But the funny thing about, none of them are the smoking gun that he promised they would be. But some of the side issues that came out I thought were actually just as interesting, and one of them, of course, was the, two Chinese are, worth more than one Indian. And I think it's really insincere the way the National Party have tried to spin that as being about it's about being multicultural and having a part of our diversity strategy, and that's actually just crap. It's about money, and I think to try and spin it as anything else is I'm insulting people's intelligence.
Discussions about party lists happen all the time down in Wellington, and they happen all the time in the media out in the open. There are always columns saying, will National be able to match Labour's diversity in its party list for this election? Will Labour be able to match National's diversity in its party list? If you start from first principles, it would be unthinkable in the modern New Zealand if either political party produced a candidate list for an election that did not have a Chinese New Zealander in it. It would be unthinkable for them to produce a list that didn't. These are the major parties, National and Labour. It would be unthinkable for them to produce a list that didn't have an Indian New Zealander, and there are all sorts of reasons for that, and diversity and the inherent good of diversity is one of them. But you just don't have that kind of preamble in every discussion where somebody raises the list. That's kind of taken as read. You don't have disclaimers in normal what you think of as private conversations where you sort of set out the principled reasons why you think that diversity is something to aim for on the list, or
But this was a conversation that was raised specifically around donations and what the expectations were of someone who had just made a big donation to the National Party. It wasn't like Jamie and Simon riffing about how to better reflect, the makeup of New Zealand.
I think that's absolutely right. But when you actually go back and look at the exchange, the incriminating words were all spoken by Jami-Lee Ross, who at the time was trying to sort of undertake the most botched sting operation since Steve Irwin, and
bad, eh?
And so all of the things that are, were quite offensive, saying, two Chinese better than two Indians. And then Simon Bridges responded, well, that's what we've got right now, right? So what I understood him to be saying was, we currently have two, you've brought up two Chinese is better than two Indians. Well, we currently have two Indian MPs. And then he said we would need to make more space because we already have, we already have these MPs. If you can't get, you need to make space for any new MPs, and Bridges doesn't mention ethnicity. And in order to do that, you've got to find people who are going to retire, like Finlayson and presumably Carter, and people who are effing useless.
I get all that, Ben, but it's more like what appears to be a glimpse inside the culture of the National Party, whereby candidates of a certain cultural background hold a certain monetary value. In terms of list placings and that sort of thing. Can I say, just going back to the press conference, when me and Mihi watched it together, and we were literally jaw on the floor, shocked with all these revelations that keep coming out. And I have to say, I thought he was absolutely compelling and convincing, particularly in comparison to Simon Bridges, who came out afterwards. And to be able to stand in front of the press gallery and tell that many porkies and be that manipulative with the truth, and to answer every single question that came his way non-defensively and openly and articulately, I've never seen anything like it in the history of New Zealand politics. It was the most compelling piece of political theatre I've ever seen.
But
and
it's
just
theatre,
what was going on? And has he convinced himself of that, or is he just such a brilliant bullshit artist?
It was very 2018. It was like where the preview was a lot better than the movie itself.
But it's been it's been said a lot of times already, and Jami-Lee Ross wrote a piece for us for the spin-off a couple of years ago when he was in the States, and he talked about the West Wing and Game of Thrones, not Game of Thrones, what's the other one, House of Cards, and the whole kind of deja vu or redux of the dirty politics stuff. There is a sense, I mean, it's possible to overstate this, that all of that squad feel like they're in a political drama, and that I mean, this is not necessarily the thing about Jami-Lee Ross not having had much experience outside being an MP, but he doesn't. He's like 32, incredibly. But
I interviewed him when he became a councillor, when he was voted on the council in Manukau. I think he was
like 19 or something?
I think he was 18, 19. Right. He was living with his grandmother, and
yeah.
I think he was in like Botany or somewhere. I drove out there and met him, and he's lived a pretty sheltered life in that regard. I feel like he has sort of spoiled mokopuna syndrome a little bit. Like when you've been completely indulged and convinced that you are, super, super special, and that's probably what allows you to fully believe the stuff that you're saying. Sorry, a little bit of...
No, that's good.
Little bit of
psychotherapy.
Sorry about
we'll
that.
sort it out.
I apologise.
I guess before we move on from this, just quickly, I mean, the question is, what is the impact? Because it was interesting, we're talking now on Thursday morning. On Monday morning, the story came up with the tape, and that was fed to Newshub, and it was thrown at... It sort of just derailed all of Simon Bridges' Monday morning interviews as regular round. Yeah. But then it was gone. It was the story hasn't really, and there are all these kind of, there's a bit of a piñata effect originally from that original press conference, and then the recordings, and we had the issues about ethnic minority representation with the National Party. We had the issues around political donations. We also had the harassment. We had the mental health. But part of me still feels as though, in a way, this story, because it's not tethered to any visible faction within the caucus, there's no sense that there is any kind of fermenting uprising as it stands within the caucus, that it's a sort of a flash flood. Like, it sort of felt originally like this was kind of unsustainable. But is it possible, I'm interested to hear from you both, that Simon Bridges can ride it out? That it's a flash flood and it's past, and Jami-Lee Ross is such an aberration and Rogue doesn't begin to cover it. That no matter how much, Nikki Hager argues that there's a connection to Judith Collins, but it just doesn't seem as though there is any element within caucus, and so maybe it doesn't.
Can I just say before we get into that I feel completely aroha for any woman who was harassed by Jamie, and I wish them all the best, and feel that they've been really badly let down, and that if Jami-Lee is genuinely suffering a mental health crisis, that I feel aroha for him too, and I really hope that he gets the help and the support he needs. However, if mental health has been manipulated in this situation or inauthentically cited as a reason for this behaviour, that would be the most loathsome thing to have ever happened in New Zealand politics. So I really hope that what's been said about his mental health is genuine, and I wish him a speedy recovery. I do not think Simon Bridges can survive this. I think that the National Party are going to hold tight for a certain amount of time, because I think, if they go after him now, it will, it means that they will lose the next election, no doubt. they will look unstable and all of that sort of stuff. So I think that they're trying their best to give a veneer of solidarity and kotahitanga and all of that stuff. And I think initially that was probably very authentic, but I have not a single doubt in my mind that the knives are being sharpened as we speak, and that it is only a matter of time until he goes down. And who knows how many tapes that, Ross plans on leaking, but, every time is a blow to his credibility and Paula Bennett's credibility, and it's just going to become a weeping sore on the side of the National Party. And Labour has to do nothing. They don't have to do a single thing. They just let it all play out. They don't have to speak a word about it, and they're busy, killing themselves off. Labour has to do nothing. It's like the best thing that could have ever happened for Labour and New Zealand First. So I have no doubt that it might not be in the near future, but it will be coming, I believe.
Ben?
Yeah, I think Annabelle's right. Like, National it would be unthinkable to depose Simon Bridges right now.
Absolutely.
Because then you're just giving a carte blanche veto to any embittered backbench MP who has access to a recording device on their iPhone to release what are increasingly looking like, secret tapes of people's coffee orders, or, standing in a queue bitching at New Zealand Post or something. Like, they're about that much consequence and moment, I think. But people get excited because a lot of the time people can't distinguish between a secret recording of a conversation and a recording of a secret conversation. I think how difficult this is for Bridges to ride out will depend on the media and its appetite to keep running what I think in a lot of cases are either non-stories or victimisation attempts, in the case of Radio New Zealand running that text. Can I say on behalf of the media, we'll run everything. It's the gift that keeps on giving. No journalist is going to turn down like a juicy conversation or the opportunity to embarrass a politician live on air. So I think if there's more stuff, the media will run it.
So if Cameron Slater came to you with a tape?
Well, not me, because I work on the Hui and we're classy and we do highbrow, important current affairs about, the most vulnerable New Zealanders in the country.
Foolish of me to
but others
put that to you.
So, go.
Yeah. Good. Meanwhile, Jacinda Ardern is still the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and had her first Labour conference as leader of that particular party, which seems kind of amazing. And as we go through,
queues around the corner.
All the way to the octagon. All the way to the octagon, Ben.
200 metres out the door. Nothing like that under Obama.
True. Did you pay any attention to the Labour conference in Dunedin, Annabelle Lee?
We interviewed Jacinda on Saturday.
Yeah.
Such a stink friend, Toby. No, but other than that, to be honest, no, I didn't.
Ben?
Sorry.
I sort of registered that it was happening. There was an announcement about more support for special needs students.
Yes.
That went down well.
Yeah, a bunch of new staff.
Yeah, that's
Seems
promising.
like a good idea.
A sort of a kind of bridging halfway announcement for all the other issues that they've got to grapple with in the primary sector, but popular amongst the commentariat. So it was, a good announcement when you don't
primary teacher strike on Monday. If anyone's got can help out with childcare issues, that'd be appreciated. Just a general call out.
Hey, speaking of teachers, I just spent the last couple of days in Whanganui shooting a talk that Mike King did down there at a local high school.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who complains about teachers going on strike, you guys are like total assholes, because teachers are not teachers anymore. Teachers are teachers and oranga tamariki workers and confidants and counsellors and bloody nurses and doctors. The stuff that they have to do to support our kids is unbelievable. And if you think that they just knock off at 3 and go home and mooch around on holidays, you're deluded, and you should probably go and visit your local school and see the sort of stuff that these guys are dealing with and the challenges that our kids face. And if you're mean-spirited enough to to resent them going on strike to get decent pay, then you shouldn't listen to this podcast anymore.
You're banned. You're banned. You've just been banned.
Yeah.
You've been banned from listening to this podcast. By
People don't
Annabelle
resent teachers. They just resent having to look after their children.
They resent their
children.
Kid. Yeah.
Well, the thing that bothers ridiculously, people who don't have children at school won't know this. They shut them down for like whole periods of weeks, like 3 or 4 times a year. They just shut the schools, 2 weeks off, and then over Christmas they shut them down for like 6 weeks.
Bizarre.
It's very strange.
Crazy.
Need to fix that. That got my vote. Otherwise, though, it was kind of a happy conference for Jacinda Ardern. Everyone seemed very happy. She did a speech which was quite high concept. Just read out a whole lot of letters. Happy. Everyone was happy. It was fine, but they're not altogether plain sailing.
Well, there's been a poll
example,
since we last met.
A poll.
The government's
a government.
The government is
5 a year we get.
Is
now,
it TVNZ?
TVNZ.
The government's 12 points clear of nationals. So I mean, the poll was taken during the week of Jami-Lee's press conference, so it wasn't ideal timing for the poor opposition. But I mean, 12 points.
The National Party had dropped 2 points. I mean, the National Party had dropped 2 points.
Yeah,
so
but
it's not exactly a.
But the key was although Labour were ahead of National, and both of the support party or the coalition partner, New Zealand First, and the support party, the Greens, both above 5%. So, I mean, that's a very strong position for the government to be in.
And then we've done this bit about some bridges already, but it was interesting to me that in the immediate round of interviews subsequent, he kept saying, "Oh, we'll be up, we'll be up, we'll be back in the next one, we'll be back in front in the next poll." Seemed like, talk about, what do you call it? Carving out a rod for your own back.
It's just another one of those white lies, isn't it? When you're an opposition leader talking about a poll that hasn't gone well for you, there are these sort of rehearsed lines of what did Labour say?
No, but you don't say.
Goff and Andrew Little used to always say, "Oh, that's not what we're hearing on the streets." That's not what I'm hearing when I talk to people. They weren't talking to pollsters, obviously. They're just kind of talking to random people. It's a diabolical position to be in when when somebody confronts you as opposition leader and on a bad poll, what can you say? You just go, well, we're confident that, we've heard other things. I think everyone knows what's going on.
Bridges was on, I think, 7% as preferred Prime Minister. It was not very many. It was not very many at all. And Judith Collins was nipping at his heels.
People love people who troll people on Twitter, apparently.
Wow, that's good. That's music. People love people who troll people on Twitter. Speaking of people who enjoy our podcast, Iain Lees-Galloway, one of the big fans of Gone By Lunchtime.
Is he a fan, Tobe?
Oh, he's a big fan.
Really?
Apparently.
Hi. Thanks for listening.
And as a big fan, I think we've pretty much agreed that he's got no problems. He should be immediately promoted.
Yeah, he's all good,
and just leave him alone, Yeah.
Back off.
Look, it's a difficult position. So he granted permanent residency to the career criminal kickboxer gangster drug dealer for identity theft. Check.
Yeah. Seems like a good guy.
who apparently I think he had to be granted permanent residency so that he could finish his prison term. Is that right?
I feel like he'd be really good at teaching self-defense classes or something. There's a place for him.
And it's difficult because when you're the immigration minister, you get these files. They've got lots of private and sensitive information. Because you're often subject to appeals and judicial reviews on your decisions, you don't go into any detail when you say why you've made a particular decision. That's just the convention, because you want to narrow the sort of range of targets for somebody to appeal. You say it's never done as a kind of exact calculation. It's sort of, you say, I've considered these factors and then I came to this decision. But you don't sort of say, I gave this 10%, I gave this 15%, whatever. And so on that basis, when this seemingly odd decision came up, Iain Lees-Galloway said, well, I can't go into detail but I stand by my decision. The Prime Minister urged the press gallery to read between the lines, because there was a suggestion in a court case in one of this guy's lengthy history of written judgments involving him in the New Zealand court system. One of the judge's remarks was that there was sort of this idea, there was this suggestion that he was in some kind of danger from supposedly corrupt authorities, that was sort of unstated if he went back to the Czech Republic.
He'd find himself in a Prague canal.
Yeah, that's right. And so, but then it turned out he's actually been back a couple of times. That was noted in another court judgment, which didn't come to the attention of the immigration officials who supplied Lees-Galloway with this
which are
information.
obtained reasonably straightforwardly by members of the media.
It definitely looks like a big screw up from the officials who gave him the file if they didn't include that information. I mean, there's no question. This is not a resignation offence.
Well, we don't know the full circumstances yet, do we? So it's difficult to kind of judge fully. But, I mean, it depends where you put the onus.
It's a big fat cock-up, but I don't think he should necessarily have to resign over it. I think it seems pretty clear that he's been badly let down by his officials.
Should it be written into the Act that the immigration minister, upon using his or her discretion, should consider all the paperwork provided by officials and run a quick Google search?
That is a great idea, Toby.
Look, the minister doesn't have time. Maybe his staff could do a Google. I don't know. I mean, look, I no harm seems to have actually been caused as a result of this yet.
He's currently in jail, isn't he?
He's currently in jail.
Yeah. It's all good.
So we've got some breathing room.
Yeah.
But it's a mess up. But I can't see this call for, in the old days, of course, there used to be this very high threshold or this very low threshold for ministerial resignations. You took responsibility in a kind of very broad sense for everything that happened in your portfolio. If there's a departmental mess up like this, you'd tender your resignation. That hasn't really been the case in New Zealand for about 25 years, I would say. You see,
used to be a core principle of Westminster government's ministerial responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, right now, of course, these days, the biggest sin you can commit as a minister is making the Prime Minister look like an ass. And Lees-Galloway's error on behalf of his officials kind of skirted close to that, because the Prime Minister really kind of went into bat for the decision and said she had been assured it was all above board.
Yeah,
at her
and now
press
she's using a
conference.
form of words, which is that she has confidence in the officials, but not confidence in the advice, which is a bit like, you're not a racist, you just said some racist things. I'm not alleging that the Ministry of officials are in any way racist. Let me
But
be
look,
totally clear on that point.
Galloway's performing reasonably well in hard, quite key portfolios for Labour. The employment, workplace relations, health and safety. There's no real. He's fine.
He did hide
He's
behind
fine.
a pillow, which is always funny. Another minister facing some pressure is with a very busy portfolio or collection of portfolios is Philip Stoner Twyford. The KiwiBuild kind of unveiling a couple of weeks back in, where was it? It was in South Auckland. In Judith Collins' country, involved some rather kind of cheerful middle-class couple who then had their social media accounts scoured by people who spend too much time on Twitter, including Judith Collins, and yada, yada, yada. I mean, the KiwiBuild program is a really big deal for this government, and they've been trying to front foot it and get things underway, but does it feel perilous?
I feel really bad for that couple because, they've just gone and applied according to the rules and found themselves at the centre of all these headlines. Bernie Smith came and did the Bruce Jesson Memorial Lecture the other week, and he's pretty scathing about KiwiBuild.
The one Ben went to.
The one my beautiful friend Ben went to. He was pretty scathing about KiwiBuild and the fact that, our homeless our rates of homelessness are at an all-time high, and we're building kind of crappy houses for middle-class whānau when so many are struggling to find, rental properties. And his thing is that if KiwiBuild was all rental accommodation, then that would take the heat out of the housing market anyway, and therefore make it easier for those, KiwiBuild families to be able to buy their own home. And I have to say I agree. And then to find out that the government has now backed down on being able to sell the house. I think originally they whoever bought it weren't allowed to sell it for 5 years. Is that right, Ben? And they've now quietly
if they had to get permission from the government. So if they had a change of circumstances where they needed to move cities for their jobs or whatever, they would probably get a dispensation. Otherwise, if they did it without that permission, they would have to surrender 100% of the capital gain over their purchase price to the government. Now the government has changed that to a 30% penalty. And the thing is, these houses were sold, at about I think the 4-bedroom houses were sold at about a $70,000 discount to the market. And that means that immediately, the couple that we don't want to talk about because they've been through enough, they could sell their house and just pocket $50,000 now. Now, that doesn't seem to me to be what the purpose of KiwiBuild was, to let everyone in on the Kiwi dream of being a property flipping speculator. There's been a fundamental sort of communication error. The point of KiwiBuild was that you build 100,000 new homes, and that helps the supply, and the fact that there are more homes on the market drives down prices. And that's the sort of fundamental aim of KiwiBuild. Now, they've added in this thing, this part where it's affordable housing, so it's sold at a discount to market.
But it's not really affordable.
But well, it's still not really affordable, except for people who can service $500,000 mortgages, who can pay $700 a week in mortgage repayments in the low interest rates we have now. And it is hard to avoid the conclusion that the government is making hay on this idea that there is just a lottery where you can make a $70,000 capital gain by entering a ballot.
Are they making hay on that? I don't know. I mean, the argument is that you need to increase the amount of stock in the market, right? And then the follow-up question to that as well, with the criticism that's being laid at the door routinely by Judith Collins and co particularly, but these are houses that have been bought off developers, and you need to build a house from the ground up on new plans, and we haven't seen any of those yet, have we?
I mean, it is, look, I mean, some of these were houses, developments that were already in train, and a lot of them are off the plan purchases. That's not trivial. Like if they buy a whole bunch of planned apartments in a development, that might give the developer the security and the capital they need to get it done on time to bring it to market earlier. So that's not nothing. But, I mean, the real issue with KiwiBuild in the next, 5 years or whatever is the other capacity constraints, which is, Resource Management Act, the lack of construction workers, the lack of tradies. If somehow Phil Twyford can find a whole bunch of tradies who aren't booked up for the next year, which no one else in New Zealand can, to put in taps and, plugs and things into KiwiBuild homes, then, he has to a large extent, facilitated solving the housing crisis.
And so the thing too, so Ben, that it's gone from 5 years down to 3, right? Being able to flip the house.
That was News Hub story last night.
Yeah. So I think, Labor has to be careful about there not being a growing perception that they chicken out on stuff. And, capital gains tax, there was the captain's call, we were going to have capital gains tax, then they climbed down on that one, all the way back in 1999 there was the big, we're going to close the gaps, then they decided that they didn't like race-based funding after all. So I think they need to be careful that this perception doesn't develop among their supporters that they that they will back down on those important policies when pressure comes to bear. And there's already a perception, certainly amongst Māori, that the only type of accommodation Labour likes building for poor people are jails, a la Ngā Whā prison last time. So, I think they need to tread carefully when it comes to KiwiBuild, that it's not seen as not delivering to the people who need it the most.
It's such a big portfolio that Twyford has. He also has transport. But in terms of the KiwiBuild program, the way I keep Phil Twyford with KiwiBuild, Shane Jones with the Regional Growth Fund, big amounts of money, huge amounts of public money. So much, every project, so many different parts of it, so much. We talk about ministerial responsibility, and it still exists in some sense. Things can happen that are outside necessarily the immediate span of view of the minister. I just feel like they're both very confident, very confident ministers.
Good self-image, both of them.
Not constantly doubting their own ability, I wouldn't say. And I feel like those two bulldozers, one of them is going to come a cropper, is my crazy prediction at some point in the next couple of years. I don't know what it is.
Interesting.
But let's talk about another couple of, before we go, briefly just touch on a couple of people who make Twyford and Shane Jones seem like mild-mannered, modest exercises in humility, and that is, of course, Jerry Brownlee and Trevor Mallard. A little story that David Seymour drove through, but they went to Tokyo for 48 hours to go and watch the rugby and do sports diplomacy or some, bullshit like that. And, I just thought, they're just taking the piss, right? So Waldorf and Statler of the New Zealand Parliament, who have... been, it's like a little, it reads to me like a kind of make-up, and someone signed it off who was like, oh, they're not getting on, let's go and patch over. Why don't you boys go and drink some fucking beer in Tokyo and watch a rugby game, patch it up? Together they've been in Parliament more than 50 years, and they're just taking the piss, what's
really taking the piss, though, is that David Seymour is leading the charge on this. I'm way more incensed that he spent however many weeks it was pissing around on Dancing with the Stars.
All right, well, the only solution to this is for Jerry Brownlee and Trevor Mallard to appear on Dancing with the Stars by way of penance.
To raise the money to repay their trip, 20 cents from texts at a time.
I really don't think it's that big a deal, to be honest. And I think the fact that Seymour is the one fronting it just makes me want to vomit in my mouth, given that he was on full pay during Dancing with the Stars. Like, you are such a big fat hypocrite. Are you for real?
There's a little bit of this.
Go
like
and
in
crump
history.
somewhere else. Crump in your own time. I would like you to pay back. Twerk, crump, whatever.
What's crumping?
Dab. Do you know what a dab is?
Oh, yeah.
What's the side hips one that my
like
kids do?
That one.
Is
there the fortnight dance as well? Is that?
That's what it. Yeah, it's a fortnight dance. I think there's a special name for it though.
Yeah.
Anywho, the other thing too is just in terms of
Jerry
travel.
Brownlee.
Can we get rid of that free travel for the old coots of Parliament that have retired?
We can do that,
and they still get to fly around the world for cheap and get a certain amount of domestic flights. Really get lost. No. Enough.
Two things, because I believe in a representative democracy which has a parliament with younger people in it, and not just sort of the accumulated dead wood, like a sort of dead burnt out Cody forest or something, a petrified forest of MPs.
Cody dieback of Parliament, yeah.
And so I think for that reason...
the soles of your shoes before you approach these fuckers.
I think you should probably incentivize MPs to become ex-MPs as much as possible. So I think that's why I support keeping the travel perks for ex-MPs.
That doesn't encourage them to leave. Why would you leave to have
then,
6 free flights when you can have free flights all year round, as many as you want, because you're an MP?
Jerry Brownlee and Trevor Mallard would have to then pay for their own flights to Japan to watch the rugger if they left.
They can take David Seymour with them too, by the way.
But the other thing is when the New Zealand cabinet and the Australian cabinet in the past, they used to have these joint cabinet meetings where the sort of top dogs from New Zealand would fly over to Australia and have a meeting to discuss kind of issues in common, and a real sort of meeting of the minds and the power elite to plot the course of the two countries, and they would always happen on Bledisloe Cup weekends. So there's nothing really new in any of this, but this does seem to be a pretty extreme example, particularly, as you note, Brownlee and Mallard right now basically hate each other and have been at loggerheads and basically hammer and tongs for the past year as shadow leader of the House and the Speaker. And the idea that they had a sort of boys' weekend in Tokyo is, I think, taking the piss.
Yeah, it is taking. We're agreed. Happy to patch up with my many enemies if someone will pick up the business class return flights to Tokyo. That's time for us. This has been Gone By Lunchtime. Thank you very much, Tina, for controlling all the important technology, and to Flick, our sponsor of the politics section on the spin-off, and dear friends of the spin-off, and you should have a look at any page in the politics section, click through and have a look at the deal they can do for you. Thanks a lot, Annabelle.
You're welcome.
It's lovely to see you.
You too.
Thanks, Ben. It's been lovely to see you.
Could have seen me at the Bruce Jesson lecture, but it's fine. You're busy.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.